I wrote this idea down after it spontaneously appeared in my head a few months ago. This is the first time I'm revisiting it since then, and I'm not going to pretend that the ideas communicated here aren't chaotic. That being said, I'm going to try my best to adhere to the ideas as I originally had them. The thoughts in this idea are merely testing the idea of creativity, not redefining it. Towards the middle of the video, I'll describe creativity more objectively and scientifically. Creativity is nothing more than the product of madness and uncertainty. Before jumping into these thoughts, it is essential that I quickly define the terms I'm going to be using in the way I intend for them to be understood. Uncertainty is the questions the general state of existence brings up. Since we humans don't have any proper answer to our being, we are left uncertain and searching for answers. Those who manage to remedy the existential anxiety uncertainty entails typically attract people who follow their ideas. Mimicry/following. Those who are uncertain and seeking answers typically mimic those who act as if they do. The only creativity here is the creativity that comes with lying to yourself to convince yourself others have the answer. Essentially, this isn't true creativity. It is important to realize that mimicry might not always be obvious or explicit. Madness is uncertainty to its fullest extent. If the creative answer to the existential angst wasn't found during the uncertain phase, this is where it will show up, but usually in an irrational manner. A madman's idea of existence isn't typically worth following. If the person suffering from this madness can't contrive an answer for themselves, they may be left mad and dysfunctional. On an individual level, one might consider this insanity. On a societal level, one might consider this pandemonium. My model for how this theory works goes as follows. We are all born into society and taught how to function. Therefore, we all mimic to a certain extent. Once we get older and start to challenge our previous ideas, we are met with the uncertainty reality conjures up that everyone has had to deal with. Here, we either form our own way of thinking or choose to continue mimicking. If it gets to the point where the existential angst one is feeling is too debilitating, usually caused by some form of trauma or unusual event that challenges all of a previous ideology's notions, one might begin to jump to conclusions and have a fractured idea of reality. If the person is unable to recover from this and then goes on to form their own ideas, they are likely to be radical or even irrational. Ideological creativity. Madness is uncertainty in its most extreme form. Madness is inhibitive and detrimental to survival on both an individual and societal level, and because of this, we do whatever we can to avoid madness, even if our solution borders on insanity. Our propensity to avoid madness, to search for or create answers that aren't there, is creativity. It is also madness in itself, generating nothing from nothing to delude yourself into a state of existential comfort. If the creator is successful, defined by having others follow their idea, they are seen as a genius. They are the designer of a philosophy, an ideology, or a religion. They are a leader of sorts, and people naturally come around to follow them if they can't generate their own answers. It doesn't matter if the basis of their ideology is mad if it is convincing. Think of the Salem witch trials. The threat of the supernatural posed an existential threat to society and the views people within it held at the time, and leaders were able to convince their followers to follow them on the basis of their religion, which led to the killing of many innocent people. As a matter of fact, witch trials were nothing new in 1692 when the events at Salem transpired. Witch trials were something that began in Europe sometime in the early 1300s and lasted until the late 1700s. Although the amount of people killed throughout this period is unknown, the general estimate is somewhere between 40,000 to 60,000. To be suspected as a witch didn't require any real basis of evidence. A mere suspicion would suffice, and the grounds of that suspicion could simply be a matter of disagreeing with the witch trials themselves, which serves as a perfect example of uncertainty turning into full-fledged madness. There is still a lot of speculation surrounding what occurred in Salem. The purported abnormal behavior that led to the wide hysteria has been explained to have been caused by things such as church politics to ergotism, a condition caused by ergot, a fungus that grows on rye and can cause symptoms ranging from hallucinations to convulsions. The ergotism theory, however, is typically looked down upon by experts, considering a lack of historical records. In the eyes of the followers, the persecution of innocent people wasn't madness, it wasn't irrational. it was a seemingly sensible solution to an existential problem they followed because everyone else was as well. With time comes perspective, and now we look in the past and shun the murders of the witch trials because we recognize the mass hysteria/delusion that afflicted all involved. The reason madness doesn't seem mad at the moment of a terrible event is largely because of a groupthink or mob mentality. My theory for why this occurs is because any ideology made to rid our minds of uncertainty is uncertain in and of itself, despite any efforts to convince ourselves otherwise. Uncertainty can become madness once the definition can no longer suffice as comfort, when something threatens our worldview, for instance. If you add enough uncertainty to the equation, the ideology begins to shatter slowly, and at some point, the ideology dies or is reformed. Before this happens, the chaos that follows madness seems justified if it means preserving your worldview, your reality. Christianity has reformed and broken apart into many different ideologies multiple times, the most famous being the Great Schism and the formation of the Roman Catholic Church and Eastern Orthodox Church. The chances are that it will likely continue doing so as the world progresses and certain ideas no longer apply. A quote I read in Ralph Waldo Emerson's essay entitled Self-Reliance goes as follows: "Society is a wave. The wave moves onward, but the water of which it is composed does not." In terms of my thinking, I see the wave as an ideology and the water as uncertainty. Everything created to avoid uncertainty is fundamentally made of the uncertainty itself, and once that wave crashes down and breaks apart, representing madness, the water will eventually form new waves. In many cases, an aversion to madness, religious living, for instance, can lead to more madness if founded on delusional premises. An example would be satanic worshippers being a threat to the world. What people within society see as delusional and insane is subjective, hence why these events such as the witch trials, the Manson family murders, which I'll quickly touch on, and even the Holocaust happen. This highlights the importance of questioning the authoritative figures in our lives because, believe it or not, no one knows best. Everyone has their own ideas and motives for happiness. We are all mad in our own ways. We are just so delusional that we don't want to see it. The Manson family has many, many layers to it, and I'll be the first to admit that I don't know everything there is to know about what happened, but upon doing just a little bit of research, the cause was clear. Charles Manson was a very charismatic person who was a master of exploitation and social engineering. His goals were driven by racism and white supremacy, and the ideas he espoused were that black people were unruly and unfit to run society. Therefore, he wanted to start a race war with anyone willing to follow him. According to Vox.com, Manson's goals far extended his racism and the idea of helter-skelter, but the main idea is that he was able to convince others that society was degrading, which in this case is uncertainty, and that his way of living was the correct way. We can see that ideological creativity meant to define a way of living, divides us and ignores the latent madness that surrounds us all. Artistic creativity expresses madness in a raw form. I'm going to quickly mention the topic of deviance by noting that defying the conforming majority's opinion can result in you being seen as a threat even if you are correct. If you disagreed with the witch trials, you might as well have been a witch. If you disagreed with the fascist regimes, you were a threat. But in some cases, deviance can be seen as artistic, especially if the deviance surrounds pop culture. Deviating from pop culture and forming your own ideology doesn't have to apply on a societal level. Musicians and artists do this when creating their own variations of music genres. Shortly after an artist redefines a genre, many others follow shortly, showing the idea of uncertainty and mimicry applies artistically as well. Quickly jumping back to what I was talking about beforehand, if you recall the terms I defined at the beginning of the video, I said the person in a state of madness who curbs their existential angst would likely create an irrational ideology. Charles Manson exemplifies this. His irrational and uncertain notions about black people already crippled him to the point that it seeped into his ideology. Madness is fragmentary in many ways. Uncertainty leaves room for creation and open-mindedness, but madness usually forms as a result of broken data or false conclusions. What I mean by this is pretty simple. Someone who has gone mad is someone who deviates from what is socially acceptable. If the mad person forms their own ideology, it'll likely be composed of their deviant thinking. The leaders of the witch trials, on the other hand, were only following an ideology that was founded by uncertain people, which we all are. The madness only followed after unaccounted situations threatened the ideology and its existence, producing more uncertainty and therefore madness. Individual madness. Madness from a societal perspective is different from madness on an individual level. Many people believe that insanity and creativity are linked, but that isn't fully corroborated by science. Many people like to bring up Sylvia Plath, Vincent van Gogh, or even Kanye West when conversations about creativity and mental illness are brought up. Although it is possible that because creative types can have an unusual thought process that differs from most people's, they might hold ideas of reality that are incongruent with others, that isn't a sufficient indicator of mental illness. If there really is a link between mental illness and creativity, I think the result is more dependent on the situation that individuals are enduring. For instance, because someone with bipolar disorder experiences extreme mood swings that most people don't, their experience of the world is different, and consequently, so is the art they produce. With depressive types, the chances are that their more bleak or pessimistic outlook of the world is seen as unique or creative because most people don't think that way. It isn't right to say that creativity and mental illness are fully linked because most creative individuals don't suffer from mental illnesses. And if someone wants to contest that the two are connected, how would they define creativity? Creativity does encapsulate more than what's traditionally seen as art. An engineer or a scientist is creative in that the solutions they come up with solve issues that others haven't yet figured out. Of course, a different thought process might be the cause of this as well, but I think for a more practically creative person, the disorder they experience might be more related to their perception of the world around them in an either detached or obsessive way. Many people like to believe that Isaac Newton had a high-functioning form of autism, or what was formerly known as Asperger's. According to an article I read on ScienceDaily.com, the link between creativity and psychosis has largely been based on anecdotal evidence and correlational studies. The article then describes an experiment testing the different approaches schizophrenic, neurotypical, and schizotypal people took to come up with uses for everyday objects. The findings showed that schizotypal people were able to generate the most amount of uses for specific objects, and upon having their brains monitored, it was found that the activation in their brains' right hemispheres were more frequent, possibly showing that schizotypal disorders may be associated with higher levels of creativity. Some studies mentioned in an article by Scientific American have found that no other condition correlates with creative occupations aside from bipolar disorder, with only an 8% increased chance of entering a creative job. However, something to note is the prevalence of people in creative professions with siblings suffering from mental disorders. It was found that those related to first-degree relatives of patients with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and various other mental disorders displayed higher amounts of schizotypal traits, once again supporting the link between schizotypy and creativity. It seems that, in reality, the link between mental disorders and creativity is quite tenuous, and the idea of the disturbed artist is mainly romanticized and perpetuated by pop culture. Although there are always exceptions, it is important to consider how many famous artists, musicians, performers, and otherwise renowned creators didn't have mental illnesses. As far as society is concerned, I do still agree with what I said about uncertainty being the leading factor in the creation of ideology. There would be no need to define things if we were always certain about them. When it comes to something as dynamic and volatile as a society, certain definitions and ideologies don't always stay compatible and can lead to disastrous results if someone constantly tries exercising control. If a charismatic person with malicious intent manages to deceive those around them by using other people's uncertainty about the world, it is only natural that terror will unfold, which is why, again, we should always make sure that we stay inquisitive. Thank you so much for watching. I understand that the ideas and everything I was conveying in this video weren't fully accurate. A lot of them were really out there and reaching for evidence that would support my viewpoint, even though there's probably a lot that contradicts what it was I had to say, but I was simply just trying to express whatever it was I have observed in the short time I've been alive on this planet, just so I could, I don't know, really. It was very spontaneous how it came to me, but I do think that there is a certain degree of accuracy as far as uncertainty is concerned and the creation of ideology, as I had mentioned right before concluding the video. I do think that uncertainty provides fuel for many people to kind of create their own ideas about the world or decide to follow other people's if they don't have the will to design their own viewpoint. I do think that a lot of horrible people do use uncertainty as a tool to manipulate and control those around them in order to support their own ideologies. And I think there are various examples of this occurring throughout human history. Of course, that doesn't necessarily mean that the way I defined everything, uncertainty, madness, and mimicry, are all fully accurate measurements of human society. I also don't think it's right for me to say that. I don't even think it's right for me to use madness in the context I was using it, because, of course, I think that the word madness itself is pretty open. Some people see madness as insanity from like a traditional psychological sense, and some people say madness as being irrationality or stupidity. And I guess in the context of this video, I was kind of leaning more towards the latter definition rather than the former. So honestly, it's a very complicated topic, and there's no way that everything I was saying was accurate, and I recognize that. So if anyone who's watching this video and made it to the very end of this and actually found the topic interesting wants to comment their ideas or thoughts about the topic in the comments, they will be received with great appreciation. So again, thank you so much for watching.